October 7th will forever be remembered as the deadliest day in the history of the Jewish people. After the Shoah, we have seen these massacres on that day with 1,200 people slaughtered, civilians, babies, children, men, women. Last month, we witnessed an unprecedented support and solidarity with Israel as the top EU leadership stood shoulder to shoulder with the Israeli ambassador to the EU on the steps of this European Parliament. While the Israeli national anthem, Hatikva, which means hope, could be heard throughout the European quarters. In this month's European report, we are going to look at the reactions in Europe 1 month after the massacres, this pogrom. With me in the studio, I have the Austrian member of the European Parliament, Mr. Lukas Mandl, and Tomas Sandell from the European Coalition for Israel. Thank you for being here with me.
Thanks for the invite.
My name is Yossy Lempkowicz of European Jewish Press and Europe-Israel Press Association, and this is a new episode of European Reports. My first question to you, Tomas Sandell. Over the last few weeks, we have seen hundreds of thousands of people marching in the streets of several European capitals in Europe, not in solidarity with the massacred Jews and or the hostages, the 240 hostages taken to Gaza, among them 30 children under the age of 18. But we have seen a support for Palestine. We have heard shouting Palestine from the river to the sea, which means no more Jews, no more Israel. So there is a steep rise of anti-Semitism. Why, do you think?
Well, trying to explain anti-Semitism, it transcends logic and rational thinking. And I think this is something people have been trying to figure out for hundreds of years, centuries. I recall a quote from Israeli intellectuals who said that the most, what makes things so difficult today is not only the slaughtering of Jews in itself, but the fact that in just a few weeks, the Israelis, the Jews, are being considered the perpetrators. And why is this? I think on a perhaps superficial level, we have to realize that there are at least two elements of in the marching class, the squadrismo, as they were called during the times of Mussolini. Many European leaders speak openly about imported anti-Semitism, meaning, sadly, that many from the migrants community come from countries which have been, where they've been indoctrinated with anti-Semitism. But obviously also we see what has been called intersectionality, especially on the left, where the Palestinians somehow have been given this role as the innocent victims, and Israel is then being seen as the white supremacists, the occupiers, this and that. But then, of course, we have old anti-Semitism that didn't disappear anywhere. And with old anti-Semitism, we usually talk about neo-Nazism, extreme right-wing. And you can see a mingling of all these three elements on the streets in Europe. I don't think it's fruitful to try to say, well, which one is the driving force. But anti-Semitism has this interesting phenomena of bringing together people with very different views, ideological convictions otherwise, but in the hatred against the Jews, it brings them together. And of course, this is something we should all be very much worried about.
MEP Mandl, the rise of anti-Semitism in several countries, probably since we witnessed since the largest pogrom that occurred since the Shoah. So what's your take on this phenomena, anti-Semitism, again in Europe?
It's shocking, first of all. It's shocking that this is possible. I want to quote a friend who is not Jewish himself. He texted me a few days after it occurred that all over Europe, all over the world actually, such, I would say, uprising of anti-Semitism and of Islamism, by the way, is taking place. He texted me, he's in business usually, but he's interested in politics, and he texted me, now I understand it's as weird as if after 9/11, people all over the world would have demonstrated for ISIS and the attackers of 9/11, Al-Qaeda, I mean. And this is the briefest version of how shocking it is, of explaining how weird and concerning this whole situation is. That's the first point. Fighting against anti-Semitism for many years, and also always distinguishing Islamism on the one side and Islam on the other side for many years. I have been even more shocked than I would ever have expected in such a situation. And we have to remember what happened, and we have to closely note what's happening today and what will happen the next weeks and months, because it's a historic time in a very negative sense. And we will have to learn a lot of lessons out of this time. Thirdly, we must not forget that behind all of this is the regime in Iran. Behind all of this is not some local uprising in Gaza. Behind all of this is global anti-Semitism and global Islamism. And we see one and the same attack in different means and measures all over the world. Different means and measures are demonstrations in the streets with claims which are clearly anti-Semitic, with symbols which are clearly anti-Semitic. They go further to anti-Semitic attacks against, for example, the Central Cemetery in the capital of my home country, Austria, in Vienna. They're a part of the Jewish cemetery within the big Central Cemetery of Vienna was attacked, and a part of it burned actually down. Austrians have committed the largest crimes in mankind's history, and we have to consistently remember that and consistently understand the responsibility out of it. And at the same time, we must do many things in parallel. We have to grieve. I mean, this is part of our civilization. I visited the border to Gaza a few weeks ago. I visited Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. I have talked to relatives of hostages in Strasbourg, in Brussels, in Israel. We have to grieve. I mean, this is part of our civilization, that we do not forget the victims. And we understand what really happened to them. And we still will have to reflect more on what really happened to them and what men are capable of, obviously. At the same time, Israel has to fight its very existential war. And we are supposed to support Israel as much as we can in that endeavor. Thirdly, we have to fight our war against Islamism, against anti-Semitism, against this uprising of sympathy with terror, with autocracy, and many other things which do not fit in our civilization based on human dignity, individual freedom, and the values we believe in. And this is happening every day now, and this will maybe increase as a challenge in the weeks and months ahead. And this is what we have to work on.
Tomas Sandell spoke about imported anti-Semitism, like we saw in the demonstration. But there is also, I think, a sort of expression of anti-Semitism on the political spectrum. What do you think about it?
That's something I have dealt with many years, and I also addressed it. This is something I'm very concerned about, and it occurs in the extreme left as well as in the extreme right part of the political spectrum. And it's sometimes, let's say, it comes along with the language of a language that tries to disorient us. And it begins, unfortunately, with the United Nations. Even, I mean, the United Nations did not avoid to dare to take decisions anti-Israel even a few weeks after this attack. This is a shame. And it tells nothing about Israel, but a lot about the United Nations. And these are kinds of action we really have to address, we have to be vocal about, we have to discuss and inform, evidence-based, and always, let's say, present in the public. Because if we lose our energy to time and again, day by day, inform, transfer the message, discuss, deliberate, the language of hate, the language of anti-Semitism, the language of double standards, and so on, will prevail. And this is why each and every even small step and each and every single step remains important and is revealed to be even more important than we ever thought, because in each and every neighborhood all over Europe and maybe all over the world, these things are discussed now. And we have to contribute to these discussions in the sense of human dignity and the freedom-oriented picture of humans, I would say.
We will, of course, speak about the EU reaction, the EU position since the war began. But Tomas Sandell, the war is now on more than 1 month, Israel's war against Hamas. What, in your thinking, what should Israel do to win this war? Because the objective was to destroy Hamas, and also, of course, to get the hostages back home. But what do you think would be a victory for Israel?
Obviously, a victory, first and foremost, is to bring the hostages, the 239, which we are aware of, to bring them home. And I think this should be in the interest of the whole world, the national community, regardless of where we stand politically. This is a humanitarian issue of the highest grade. But obviously, as Mr. Mandl points out, we can't think of a future with the Hamas with the objective of annihilating the Jewish state. We didn't accept this with ISIS, we didn't accept it with Al-Qaeda, we didn't accept it with the National Socialists. We cannot accept it with Hamas either. It's also important to point out that I think Israel had 3 options in respect to how to deal with this threat. You know, one was obviously something I think the United Nations would have preferred Israel taking this stance and say, well, we can't do anything. You know, this happens. You know, they killed 1,200, butchered 1,200 our civilians. They brought the hostages, but we can't do anything. Because if we do, we're going to be accused of this and that and genocide before not too long. The other option is, of course, to do like the Allies did. You know, they bombed Dresden indiscriminately. There was no outcry to say, well, how many children died and how many civilians died when the Allies landed in Normandy on D-Day. And so this would have been, in a way, a comfortable, from a military point of view, to say, well, listen, just, bomb Gaza and the war is over. No, Israel chose the most difficult of all the options, and that is to go in, to fight not only city by city, street by street, but also, building by building, a very costly, complicated war against an enemy who has a very interesting tactic that goes against all logic in conventional warfare, and that is the more innocent lives we lose, the better. And so this is in some way a war that can't be won, but I think that Israel has chosen the right path, and now it's up to the international community, to quote Macron during the first week of the war, to say we need a coalition, international coalition against Hamas. This shouldn't only be Israel's battle, it should be all of our battles.
In this regard, MEP Mandl, the European Union issued a very interesting statement on Sunday in the name of 27th, and it was a statement from EU Foreign Affairs Chief Borrell. It said, it's the first time also, that Hamas, condemning Hamas for using civilians and hospitals as human shields. This is important evolution. So also they, of course, called again for the release of all the hostages, and calling to the Red Cross to also have contact with them. But also, in the meantime, they asked for humanitarian pauses. They called pauses. What's your? Do you think that this call for pauses, some call for even ceasefire? Do you think it should be?
To be very frank, in the best case, what I can say about that is politicians should remain with their business. Whether and when and where, and in what situation and for how long, a so-called humanitarian pause or whatever kind of pause or opportunity, for example, to release hostages or to do whatever, humanitarian aid for civilians, would be appropriate, is only up to the experts of the military. So they will decide how to do it. It's not up to politicians to, from the outside, claim this or that should be done tactically, militarily now. That's where experts are really requested, and that's what experts are there for. This is my clear stance on that. Secondly, I appreciate that the European Commission and the Council and together all of the European institutions made this statement on behalf of EU. This was important. Generally, I also appreciate the EU's stance since October 7th, with some exceptions. I mean, in the first hours and days, there were some misunderstandings where I was not happy with Borrell, and I have to say that as a parliamentarian very clearly. I was more with Vahili in these days, a commissioner whom I usually do criticize when it comes to the Western Balkans, for example. But in this case, Vahili was clear in his mind, very clear in his language also.
He called for a review of
right.
Palestinian.
And this is something we have to reflect on. I mean, the whole Western world has poured money into the region for decades. And it did not lead to civil development, innovation, job creation, technology, to create a trade hub, for example. Some would call Gaza a possible Singapore of the region, and so on. No, it was misused for weapons, for teaching even children hatred. We have addressed this several times in the European Parliament in the past. So it will not go on that way. And I want to add something to what Mr. Sandell already said when he quoted Macron for an international coalition when it comes to the fight against Hamas. I think it's not only Hamas, it's all the proxies of Iran, including the Revolutionary Guards of Iran itself, including Hezbollah, and all the Islamistic and anti-Semitic activities and events all over the world that might be or are sponsored by Iran. But it's not only this, it will also be a question for all the world how to deal with Palestinians, Gaza and also the West Bank in the future, because pouring in money for decades didn't lead anywhere beside a dead-end road and many dead people. That's the truth. We have to face this truth. And the EU is very much involved into that. So we have to reflect on that, and we have to very differently behave as an international community on this region, on the so-called Palestinian issue, as it is called sometimes, to at least provide an opportunity for the next generation to create something like a civil society, not full of hatred anymore, not ready to aggression anytime, not only defined by, not at all defined by anti-Semitism, but a proper society. This is a far away vision, but we will have to start to work on it, and we have to stop pouring money into this black hole.
In this regard, Tomas Sandell, what should be the role of the European Union in, I would say, a post-conflict scenario? We have seen yesterday the foreign minister of the European Union discussing this kind of post-conflict scenario, even thinking about reinforcing the Palestinian Authority to replace Hamas in the Gaza Strip. What do you think the EU should play as a role?
Let me suggest something quite interesting that you may not have heard on this program before. I think, and there I would slightly disagree with Mr. Mandl, I think his analysis is absolutely right. I think the EU has a responsibility now to retrain the Palestinian people and the Palestinian youth. I would even call it like a denazification of the Palestinian society. Now we have to take our responsibility, because we were, exactly as Mr. Mandl said, we are responsible for letting this go, for turning a blind eye. We knew perfectly well what was going on. And we can't just leave it, because if we leave it, it will continue as it is. And I think we are probably facing an enormous re-educational program where I think that the EU should invest and invest heavily, but in a way which is very, very different from before.
But this is also true for people in Europe. Like you see, anti-Semitism is coming also from this importing the conflict, but there should be also education regarding those anti-Semites in Europe. So Jews today feel they fear about their daily life. Some people take out the kippah or the mezuzot from the houses. What do you think? How should the countries in Europe do, the governments, to protect the Jewish people, Jewish citizens in their own countries?
It's of utmost concern that we have to talk about exactly this, because we would rather talk in a better shape for Europe about fostering Jewish life, vibrant, present, public Jewish life without any fear. This is what I wish for Europe especially, and for the world generally. On the other side, this is one of the most depressing parts of the current development. It's actually the case that Jews have to fear aggression and worse in the streets of European cities again. And this is something we must fight in each and every sense, also by law, also by new laws. We have to prohibit claims like the ones, I don't want to use it online now, but like the ones shouted in many demonstrations, which are claimed to be for Palestinians, which are actually nothing but anti-Semitic and Islamistic. Also to prohibit the signals, symbols, signs of these organizations and movements and ideological backgrounds, and also to persecute each and every case. Might it be seen as small? There is no small case, because anti-Semitism is always big, negatively big. Each and every case has to be prosecuted as much as we can and very clear. And again, I come back to the public language. We have to keep public attention up for the fact that anti-Semitism is absolutely not at all accepted in any parts of European societies. It's a pity that we have to recall it time and again, but we have to. So we should do it. That's also why I appreciate this program today.
So, last question of this program for both of you. You are both strong friends of Israel and Jewish people. I would like to know what you have done in recent weeks to support Israel and the Jewish people. Tomas Sandell.
Okay. So obviously it has been a very, very busy period. We were in Geneva, met with the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross very early on with the family members of hostages to bring up this issue and put pressure on them to do everything they can to see a release. I should have been in Washington, D.C. last week if it wasn't for a cold that prevented me. But for the next weeks, I will be very busy, both in Brussels but elsewhere. To, as Lukas Mandl said, we need to continue to push, to repeat, these demands, and I will do so.
MEP Mandl, quickly.
In some sense, sometimes, to be frank, I feel privileged that due to the elected office I hold, I can do a lot. And then I feel, okay, I can contribute a bit of a difference at least, and I try to do it with many interviews, speeches, presence, sharing information about the opportunity to donate also, it's important, and also presence at various events. In Vienna at Sunday we had an event of Ziua, Women's Zionist Organization, which is an impressive organization worldwide, by the way, usually taking care of children and orphans and so on, and now all connected in this existential fight for Israel. And these are things we all can do, but I guess everybody can do something, because these issues are discussed now everywhere. And what's discussed now will define for years and maybe longer how people think, how today's children will think about Israel, about anti-Semitism, and about Islamism, and about all the issues we talk about today. So this is a crucial time, this is a historic time. That also means it's a meaningful time, and this is also meaning it's a call to action to all of us.
Thank you. This brings us to a close in today's program. I want to thank the panelists, MEP Mandl, Tomas Sandell. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Yossy Lempkowicz, and you have watched the European Report. I hope to see you again at our next episode. Thank you very much.
Alfa.